Episode of the Pyathlon Python Basic series. Today we'll be talking about loops. So what is a loop? A loop is a programming structure that allows you to do repetitive tasks in a much more efficient way. So let's make a concrete example of this. Let's say you have a list of names. If you're not familiar with lists, we have a video on that also, and I would recommend you watch that video first. But anyway, in our list we'll have names. We'll say Sarah, Steve, and Joe, and we'll run that. And let's say we want to make a function that greets these people. So let's define our function. We'll say function will def greet everyone. And we'll even pass in a list of names. And all we want to do in this function is print hello Sarah, hello Steve, and hello Joe people. Is we can just have a series of print statements. And we can say hello, and then we can say the name of the person, which will be an index in this list of names variable. So we have 3 people, so index 1, 2, and 3. We could do something like this, and then we can run that, and we'll just copy and paste this, and we'll pass in names. And let's see what happens when we run this. It seems to work, but let's try something. Let's add Kara to our list of names, and then we'll run everything again. It's not printing hello Kara, and that's because if you try to hard code everything, then you have to know precisely how many values are in your list. And even perhaps more importantly, is this code is very redundant. We have the same statement for effectively 3 times, and this is very inefficient. It's harder for people to read, and it takes longer to write. And this is where loops come in, because they make doing this repetitive task a lot easier and a lot more efficient. And it also takes the guesswork out of how many print statements do we need. So how can we do this with the list, with the loops, I mean. So there are 2 types of loops that are most commonly used in Python. And we'll talk about the first one now, which is called the for loop. And the syntax for a for loop is you say for, and then after for, you'll have to define a temporary variable. Typically when you define a variable in Python, you use the equal sign, the assignment operator. But loops have a different syntax. You don't actually need to use the assignment operator. What you could just say is the name of the temporary variable itself. So since we're looping over a list of names, we'll just use the temporary variable name. So we'll say for name, n. N is a keyword in Python that when used in this context tells Python what list do you want to loop through, or what iterable object do you want to loop through, a list in this case. So we'll say for name, n, and then we have to give Python the name of what we want to loop over. So just to reiterate what this says, it's for, which is the kind of loop we're using. We have to define a temporary variable, name, and then n comes before the actual structure that you want to go over. When we say iterate, we mean visit every item in the collection. So in our list in this example. So we have for name and names. And now we can add our print statement here. So we'll say print hello. This is called the concatenator. You can use this to combine strings in case you're not familiar with it. And we'll just say hello plus name. And remember, this name will be the temporary variable. And the way that this works is name will have a different value depending on where this loop is in its progress. So for name and names, it will start by visiting each item in our list. So the first item in our list is Sarah. And so the first value of name will be Sarah. Then it will print hello Sarah. Then the next value in names is Steve. So name will then take the value of Steve and it will print hello Steve. And then it will repeat this. So let's redefine our function and then call our function again. And now you can see no matter how long our list is, this function works because it's visiting everything in our names list. So we can even add another name. Let's say we add Ryan. It still works fine. And that's the beauty of having lists. You don't need to know how long That's the beauty of having loops. You don't need to know how long your list is. You can just visit every item, and then it doesn't matter whether it's the length is 1 or 1,000. It'll work fine the same way. The next kind of list, the next type of loop we want to talk about are called while loops. And we'll just copy and paste this function, but this time we're going to use a while loop instead of a for loop. So the structure of a while loop is while, and then we need to have a condition, and the condition, remember, evaluates to true or false. So say while, but wait, we also need a counter variable in while loops because we need something to evaluate, and what we'll evaluate is this counter. And we'll say while counter is less than the length of the list of names. Alright, so let's talk about this statement here for a minute. So while counter, which is an integer that we define here, is less than the length of list of names. So let's look at the length of names. So this function is a function that returns the number of items inside of your list. So it's a really handy function when you're dealing with while loops. So you might be thinking, okay, so counter is 0 and the length is 5. 0 is always less than 5. So won't this loop just run forever? Because the way while loops work is as long as this condition is true, your loop will execute the contents of the loop. When this condition becomes false, then your loop will break execution. We'll stop executing, I mean. And so we need to increment the value of this counter. Every time we go through the body of the loop, we want to add 1 to this counter so that this condition will eventually be false. If this condition is never false, we'll get stuck in what's called an infinite loop, and your code will just run forever because your condition will never be false and you'll never break out of your loop. So we'll do this the shorthand way. So we'll just do plus equals 1. This just says add and then reassign the value. You can also do this with division, subtraction, modulus, any operator you can do it with. But we'll just add 1 to the value of counter and then reassign it to the counter variable. But before we do that, we want to have our print statement. Here we had a temporary variable called name, so we can just do hello plus name. But here we have an integer. So instead of using the temporary variable, we'll use the index of the items in our list. So we'll say print hello. And then here we'll have list of names counter. And what this is saying is we're going to print hello and then the name at index counter. Remember, counter starts at 0, so it will say is 0 less than 5? Yes. So print hello plus list of names at index 0 and then add 1 to counter. And then is 1 less than 5? Yes. So print hello and then index 1 of list of names. And this will cycle through and print all of these names. The reason why we do less than and not less than or equal to is because remember, the last index is the length of the list minus 1 because indices start at 0. So we don't want this to be equals because we don't have anything at index 5. Okay, so let's redefine this function. And then we'll just copy and paste that and we'll greet everyone. And this works a similar way as this function. The only difference is we use the while loop instead of a for loop. But from the user perspective, the output is exactly the same. And so when do you use a for loop and when do you use a while loop? This function is fewer lines of code than this one. So this function is simpler. If you're iterating over a collection, then typically you would use a for loop. But if you're doing anything that requires you to have a counter, or if you're doing more complex operations, then you might want to consider using a while loop. So that's a high-level introduction to loops. We'll be using more loops and talking more about them as the course goes on. But for today, I just want to give you a high-level overview of for loops and while loops. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.